It's about your sister. She's gone. That was all my father said after a year of silence. No hello, no explanation, just gone. The last time I heard his voice, he was standing beside my mother, nodding quietly as she told me to leave the family business if I couldn't keep it in the family. They said I ruined their lives. All I did was tell the truth. They didn't call when I packed my things and disappeared. But now, 14 missed calls. No one ever asked where I went. Now they care, because someone else can't clean up the mess. If you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, only to be needed again when everything falls apart, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, drop a 0. Because silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest choice we get to make. 14 missed calls, 1 voicemail. My father's voice, flat and cold. It's about your sister. She's gone. The kettle whistled just as I read the screen. I let it scream for a while, shrill and aimless, like the noise might drown out what I'd just seen. 14 calls. 1 from my father, 3 from my mother, the rest from numbers I hadn't saved, but recognized all too well. My brother's work line, the house phone we never really used, and the nursing home my aunt used to manage. I hadn't heard Dad's voice in almost a year. Not since the day my name vanished from the family business's website, like I'd never existed. That day, the silence afterward had been louder than any confrontation. And yet, here it was again, his voice. Not angry, not apologetic, just cold, like a report, a technical update on the status of my sister. It's about your sister, she's gone. No context, no cause, not even her name. I let the voicemail play twice, sitting at the small kitchen table where I used to write budgets and conference notes. Now, the only thing on the table was a chipped blue mug of mint tea and an unopened letter from the electric company. My apartment smells faintly of lemon cleaner and old pine. Winter light filtered through the lace curtain in soft fragments. The floors creaked like they remembered better company. It was early December in Rock Ridge, Pennsylvania. Gray skies, a dusting of snow, and air that made you pull your collar up out of habit more than needed. The scarf sat in its usual spot on the hook by the door. Julia's. Or at least the one she left behind the night I moved out. A burgundy knit thing, barely used. I never washed it. I think I was afraid that if I did, the scent of her, of whatever we were before, would vanish completely. I reached for a cloth and wiped the kitchen counter. A faint ring remained, a watermark from the vase Mom sent me for Christmas in 2019. The last gift. The flowers were fake. The note was typed. I thought about calling back. Not because I wanted to, not because I missed them, but because part of me still believed I was the only one who ever did the right thing, even when no one asked me to. But I didn't. I stirred my tea. 3 minutes, no more. That was Mom's way. Mine now involved a little more time, a little less precision. I added honey. Not for sweetness, but to soften the bitterness I never admitted to carrying. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because they had no one else left to fix the mess. I got up, walked to the window, and watched a mother pull her child through the slush toward the bus stop. Life, indifferent, kept moving. I let the voicemail sit there for hours. Then, I pressed delete. I didn't tell anyone about the call. Not the woman downstairs who rented me the apartment and occasionally left muffins by my door. Not the pharmacist who always greeted me like a niece. Not even the retired teacher I sometimes saw at the post office and made awkward small talk with about snow tires. The message had belonged to a version of me that I wasn't anymore, and I wasn't ready to resurrect her. Instead, I cleaned. The kind of cleaning that isn't really about dust or dirt, but about distraction. I wiped down the table again, rearranged the drawer of tea bags, pulled open the old tin box where I kept receipts and notes, and, without meaning to, found Julia's handwriting on the corner of a napkin. "Don't forget your umbrella," she'd written years ago in slanted blue ink. A joke, almost. I was always the forgetful one. The one who arrived with coffee but no coat. The one who used the company printer for recipe clippings and accidentally left them inside the copier tray. I set the napkin back carefully, like it might disintegrate under too much thought. The radiator clanked and sputtered. I opened the cabinet under the sink and found the lemon oil I hadn't touched in months. A scent, sharp and familiar, hit me hard. That kitchen, our old one, had smelled like this after long Sundays when Dad grilled, and Julia made her terrible attempts at sangria, and I tried to fold dish towels the right way Mom preferred. No one ever said it, but I was always the one trying to make it feel like family. That was the thing, wasn't it? You could be erased in silence, 1 inch at a time, until you convinced yourself you were the one who disappeared. I sat back down with the second mug of tea. This time, no honey, no ritual. Just hot water and mint leaves, steeped longer than they should have been. Outside, the snow fell sideways. A neighbor scraped ice off his windshield with something that looked more like a spatula than a scraper. A girl dragged a sled across the sidewalk, though there wasn't enough snow to slide. Life was full of people pretending things were normal. I envied their commitment. I tried to imagine what Julia would have said, what she would have sounded like if she had called me first. But I couldn't. Her voice was already fading, replaced by the flatness of our father's. In the bedroom, her scarf still hung untouched. I thought, just for a moment, of wearing it out into the cold. Maybe I even wanted to. But then I remembered the way it smelled like her hair. The kind of memory that comes and punches you right in the ribs, not because it hurts, but because you realize how long you've been holding your breath. I folded a dishcloth over the ring stain on the counter. I didn't want to look at it anymore. My phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. I let it ring. The truth was, I didn't want to know. Not yet. Not what had happened. Not who had found her. Not what she might have left behind. I didn't trust them to tell it right. And I didn't trust myself to receive it with anything other than the blankness they'd always resented in me. Sometimes silence isn't an absence, it's a boundary. And for now, mine stayed intact. They said I ruined their lives, but I didn't tell a soul outside our walls. I just told the truth, to my mother. The folder had been thick with numbers, payroll records, expense sheets, invoices that didn't match. I didn't snoop. I didn't speculate. I just did the job I'd done quietly for over 10 years. Looked at the numbers, saw what didn't add up, and printed them out. It wasn't even a confrontation. I'd placed the folder on the counter while she brewed coffee. I told her softly that I thought Julia had been forging signatures, that some of the money marked for subcontractors had been diverted, that something was very wrong, and she didn't even touch the folder. She just looked at me like I'd smashed the family name into pieces. I hadn't expected praise. I hadn't even expected action, but I hadn't expected that look. We didn't talk about it after that. Instead, she called for dinner. The table was already set. New linens, polished silver, candles burning low. Julia had arrived late, naturally, but still managed to glide in with perfect hair and a bottle of wine, like she was the guest of honor. She smiled at me like she knew I'd been erased and was just waiting for me to notice. The roast beef was tender, the green bean casserole exactly like Grandma's recipe. I had made the same thing the week before, But no one commented then. No one remembered. We passed the dishes in silence. The only sound was cutlery clinking against plates and the soft hum of an old Nat King Cole record in the background. I watched Julia serve herself with grace, folding her napkin into a neat triangle while avoiding any direct glance in my direction. Midway through the meal, my mother set down her fork and said quietly, "If you can't keep this in the family, you're not family." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look up. Have you ever been told that telling the truth makes you less of a family? That silence is love and honesty is betrayal? If you've experienced that contradiction, comment 7 below. Let's see what happened next. I placed my napkin beside my plate, stood up, and left the room. No one followed. No one said a word. Julia had walked in late, coat still draped over her shoulders, and not a single apology on her lips. Yet she swept through the room like she belonged more than anyone, complimenting the place settings I had arranged the week before, pretending not to notice the folder still untouched on the hutch. She bent over the linen napkins, fingers moving swiftly to fold one into a swan. It was absurd. I had done 90% of the work for these dinners since Thanksgiving. Menu planning, grocery shopping, even braving the freezing garage to retrieve the good china. And yet Julia always got the credit. The performer, the favorite. Her version of showing up, last minute but sparkling, was enough to earn smiles. My consistency earned silence. I still remember how the roast beef smelled. Rich, buttery, seasoned with rosemary, the same way Grandma used to make it. Mom had made the casserole too, green beans and mushroom soup with fried onions on top, just like every December. I'd prepped the same meal the week before, and nobody noticed then. Nobody said thank you. The conversation that evening skirted everything real. Julia talked about a spa she wanted to try. Mom nodded. Dad muttered something about salt being too fine this time. I sat there wondering how a family could look so intact from the outside and be crumbling at every seam. I once read that silence was a form of violence. That night, I understood it fully. My truth hadn't been met with argument or disbelief. It was worse. It had been met with a wall. And the worst part? I didn't even blame Julia. Not really. Somewhere beneath all her charm and showmanship was a person who'd been rewarded for appearances her whole life. She'd learned to survive in the version of family Mom curated, where truth was dangerous and loyalty meant pretending not to see. When I stood to leave, I caught Julia's eye. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look sorry, just relieved. As I packed that night, I saw the folder still in my coat pocket. I nearly tossed it into the trash, but something made me keep it. Maybe out of spite, maybe out of hope that someone, someday, might care about what was inside. Driving away, the roads were empty. Christmas lights blinked half-heartedly from porches. A plastic reindeer lay tipped over on a lawn like it had given up. I remember thinking how fitting that was. I didn't know then that no one would call, that the silence would stretch from days into months, that my name would be dropped from emails, removed from the company website, erased like chalk on a wet sidewalk. But I know it now, and I've made peace with it. That night, I packed everything I owned into my car, and no one called to ask where I went. They didn't fire me. They didn't confront me. They just deleted me. The Monday after that dinner felt like any other. The sky was dull gray, the kind of color that settles in and doesn't leave until March. I left my apartment early, mug of coffee in one hand, folder still untouched in my tote bag. I hadn't opened it since the night I packed my car, but I didn't throw it away either. It sat beneath my wallet like a quiet weight, reminding me that truth has a shelf life, and mine had already expired. When I pulled into the lot at Ellison Construction, the snow from the night before had crusted into crunchy patches. I parked in my usual spot. I still remember the tiny chip in the curb, where I once caught my heel back when we wore office shoes. Funny how the mind stores useless details, but forgets people's voices. I walked up to the entrance and pressed my badge to the reader. A red light blinked back. I tried again. Nothing. I glanced around, pretending not to feel the cold in my gut. A new receptionist glanced up from behind the front desk. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but firm. I smiled, too stiff. "It's Claire Ellison." She paused. "Do you have an appointment?" I almost laughed. Not bitter, just tired. Before I could answer, I saw Marcia, the janitor, down the hall with her cart. She noticed me and hesitated. Her hand hovered near the side door button. A second passed, then two. Finally, she pressed it. The lock clicked open. She didn't speak, but her eyes held a quiet apology. I nodded, grateful. "Thank you, Marcia." She looked down and whispered, almost to herself, "Some things aren't meant to be scrubbed away." Then she moved on, the wheels of her cart humming softly behind her. I stepped into the hallway. It smelled like pine cleaner and faint printer toner. Everything was the same, yet completely different. I walked past the conference room where I once nervously led my first budget meeting. The chairs were new now, sleeker, like the space didn't remember me at all. I made my way to my old office, except there was no nameplate on the door anymore. The glass window that once read Claire Ellison, Operations Lead, was now blank. My reflection in it looked older somehow, washed out. I tried the handle, locked. Across the floor, people moved like I wasn't there. Not a single nod, not a smile. It was as if I'd become background static, something they could hear but chose to ignore. I hovered near the kitchenette, where the coffee machine still hummed. For years, I brought blueberry muffins every Friday. I remembered lining them up. Dan liked the ones with crumb topping. Michelle always asked for one with less sugar. They called it Claire Fridays. Now the counter was bare, save for a dusty napkin holder. No one had filled it in weeks. I stood there staring until someone behind me cleared their throat. I turned to see Mr. Dwyer walking past with a stack of folders. Our eyes met. He gave a small nod, nothing more, and kept walking. I remembered when I was 15 and he taught me how to make PowerPoint slides. He'd told me, "You've got leadership in you, kid. Don't let them convince you otherwise." I had held on to that for years. Today, he couldn't say a word. I tried my login at one of the free desks. Invalid credentials. Again. Invalid. I stared at the screen a moment longer, the glow turning my face into a mask. I didn't scream, didn't storm into the boardroom. There wasn't one anymore, not for me, no email, no access. No one came to explain. I was simply gone. I lingered at the hallway window, watching a meeting begin in the West Wing. Julia used to sit there, her voice loud and warm, commanding. Now a younger woman sat in her seat, laptop open, tapping quickly. I didn't recognize her. I turned, passing the supply closet where we once stashed birthday gifts and inside jokes. A faint scribble still remained on the wall. Team Claire 2019. Someone had tried to scrub it off, but ghosted letters remained. Like me. Faint. Unclaimed. I wasn't fired. I was erased, like a typo in a family newsletter. I walked back through the lobby. The receptionist didn't look up. The badge reader blinked red again, like punctuation. I didn't know where else to go, so I returned to my apartment. The folder came out of the tote bag. I placed it on the kitchen counter and sat across from it. I didn't open it, but I didn't throw it away either. I drove back to my apartment. I didn't open the folder that night, but I didn't throw it away either. Julia's scarf still hung by the door. She hadn't asked for it back. Maybe she never meant to. The evening settled in like a worn blanket, quiet, frayed at the edges. Outside, the wind pressed long fingers against the windows, rattling slightly like someone deciding whether to come in. Inside, my apartment was clean in the way things are when you've had too much time to think. Counters wiped, mugs stacked. A half-burned candle from last Christmas flickered faintly near the window, its scent of cinnamon now barely clinging to memory. I reached for the kettle. The mint tea leaves rustled as I scooped them into my mug. I didn't follow the 3-minute steeping rule anymore. Mom's voice used to say, "Too long, and it turns bitter." But I like bitter now. It stayed longer on the tongue. The scarf was still there, light gray, soft, expensive. It hung on the same brass hook where it had lived since she left it. Folded once, then left to sag gently. I'd tried to donate it. I remember setting it in the cardboard box, between a too-small coat and a stack of unread cookbooks. Then, I'd taken it back out, not sure if I wanted to return it or forget it. It was the last thing Julia gave me. Not as a gift, but as a gesture. That Thanksgiving night, after the family fought over Grandpa's land, I'd cried in the hallway. She didn't say a word, just wrapped the scarf around my shoulders, like she was still my sister. For a moment, I believed we were still close. That belief didn't last past morning. I held it now, letting the fabric slip between my fingers. There was a tiny snag near the hem. I ran my thumb over it. It looked like the kind of damage caused by a car door or a dog's paw, evidence of a life I hadn't lived with her in years. The radio clicked softly as I turned it on. Static, then a familiar saxophone line. Take 5. Dave Brubeck. Dad used to hum along while driving us home from church, tapping his wedding ring on the steering wheel. Mom would adjust the rearview mirror, not to see us, but to check her lipstick. Julia and I used to sit in the back, sharing headphones, hiding our hands under the same blanket. Now the room was quiet but crowded with memory. I sipped my tea, the warmth crawling into my chest like reluctant comfort. My eyes drifted to the shelf where a photo still lay face down. Julia, me, and our dog Max, taken before we learned to protect ourselves with silence. I walked to the coat closet and pulled out the donation box again. Its flaps had softened from being opened too many times. I laid the scarf on top, then paused. Again. Like always. That scarf had become a symbol, not of love, not of anger, but of everything left unsaid. My phone vibrated once. An email. "You doing okay, kiddo?" That was all. Mr. Dwyer. He hadn't written in months. Not since I walked out of the office that Monday morning. Erased. No subject line, no punctuation. Just those 5 words. I stood holding the phone, reading it over and over like the meaning might shift. Like there might be a hidden message tucked inside the simplicity. I didn't reply. I couldn't. But my grip on the scarf loosened just slightly. I sat down at the kitchen table and laid the scarf across my lap. The fabric felt cool, like it had spent the day outside. I thought about Julia's birthday, once circled in red ink on the family calendar. I couldn't remember the date now. Was it April or May? The thought ached. There were moments, small, flash-sized, when I missed her. Her bad jokes, her habit of folding napkins into birds. She once left a chocolate bar in my drawer during midterms, wrapped in a sticky note that said, "Don't die. You still owe me gas money." But those were shadows. They didn't justify what came later. The lies, the silence, the collective shrug when I needed someone to stand with me. And no one did. I folded the scarf slowly this time, with care. Not guilt. Not ritual. Just finality. I placed it back into the box, smoothing its edges like tucking in a child. I didn't include a note, no name, no explanation, no just in case. It was done. I sealed the box shut with a piece of packing tape. The sound ripped through the quiet, louder than expected. The wind howled outside. For the first time in months, I didn't hear the sound of someone knocking. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because Julia couldn't keep it together, and I wasn't there to hold the pieces. The bells above the cafe door jingled as I stepped inside, shaking the cold from my coat sleeves. The place hadn't changed. Same cedar paneling, same dusty oil paintings of barns and creek beds. The coffee smell clung to everything: burnt grounds, cinnamon, and the faint bite of winter air slipping through the drafty windows. I took a seat in the back booth, the one by the heater vent that used to click on and off every 15 minutes when I was a child. It still did. They used to bring me here after Sunday service. Dad would sit across from me in his navy sweater, reading the paper in silence, while Julia stirred too much sugar into her hot cocoa. Back then, I thought the silence was peaceful. Now I recognized it for what it really was: avoidance. Mr. Dwyer arrived a few minutes later, brushing snow off his coat, shaking his umbrella. He looked older, not just in the graying hair or the deepening lines near his mouth, but in the eyes. Tired, as if he'd seen too much of people and hoped less of them now. He slid into the booth and placed a slice of apple pie and a cup of coffee on the table in front of me. "Still your favorite?" I gave a soft nod. "Still warm," I murmured, breaking the crust with my fork. We didn't speak for a moment. The sounds of spoons against mugs, a waitress laughing with a customer near the front, the low hum of a jazz tune on the radio. Take 5, oddly enough, the same one Dad used to play on long drives. "She's really gone?" I asked. Mr. Dwyer's shoulders sagged slightly. "They're saying she left the country, offshore accounts, some fake LLCs in Delaware. The press is poking around. The Ellison names come up, repeatedly." I looked at my pie. The crust had gone cold. "So now they need a clean name to stand in front of the mess." He didn't answer directly, just said, "They think you'd calm things down?" "Steady the ship. They say it like it's a compliment." "They never once asked if I was okay." I looked up, letting my gaze pierce through him. "I know," he said, his voice low. "That's not why I came." I waited. "I came because I remember," he continued. "The day you printed those ledgers. The way your hands shook, but you still walked into that kitchen and handed the folder to your mother. You knew what it would cost you, and you did it anyway." I swallowed hard, the coffee suddenly bitter in my throat. "They're hoping you'll forget what they did to you," he said, "and remember what you used to mean to them." Have you ever been remembered only when you were useful again? Not because they missed you, but because you could clean up their mess? If you know that kind of pain, comment 9 below. Let's see what I chose to do. I stared past him, toward the rain-slicked window. The snow had turned to slush, gray streaks trailing down the glass like mascara. "Do they regret it?" I asked quietly. He looked away. "They regret getting caught." I let that sit. A memory rose, me at 15, standing in our basement office, presenting my first PowerPoint to the family about switching vendors to save on construction costs. Purple background, yellow fonts. They all laughed, even Julia. Except Mr. Dwyer, who patted my shoulder and said, "You're sharp. Don't let them dull you." I looked at him now. Why did you really come? His answer was simple. To remind you not to go back. Not because they don't need you, but because they need you for the wrong reasons. The pie was barely touched. I pushed the plate aside. I remembered that day he drove me to my scholarship interview. His sedan smelled like stale coffee and pine air freshener. The AC was too cold, but I didn't complain. Before I stepped out of the car, he told me, "Just be yourself. That's enough." It's strange what sticks with you. The feeling of vinyl seats against your thighs, the scent of cheap cologne, one kind word whispered on a cold day. Maybe we carry people in pieces. Mr. Dwyer stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, eyes fixed on the swirling cream, as though the answer lay somewhere in the motion. I used to think loyalty meant silence, he said, but maybe it just meant fear dressed up as tradition. I let the thought settle. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, weighted with things both said and unsaid. For a moment, I thought of the family holiday cards. Julia always wrote the captions. The Ellisons, stronger together. A lie wrapped in cursive gold. You know, I said, when they asked me to help cover things up last year, it wasn't even an ask. It was an expectation, like breathing, like blinking. He nodded. Because you were the dependable one, the fixer. Every family has one. And when I stopped fixing, I stopped existing. Outside, a snowplow scraped down Main Street, echoing through the quiet like a warning. I watched the salt scatter and melt into the road. He leaned back, the vinyl booth squeaking beneath his weight. You always had integrity, Claire, even when it costs you. I offered a small smile. It cost me everything. But maybe it saved something too, he said, pausing. Maybe it saved you. I looked down at my hands, fingers curled around the coffee mug like it was an anchor. For so long, I thought surviving meant returning, making peace, explaining myself. But peace doesn't come from being needed. It comes from not needing to be needed. Mr. Dwyer reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photo, an old snapshot of a company picnic. I was in it, barely 15, awkward in my posture, but proud. Julia stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. Dad was off to the side, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I kept this, he said, sliding it across the table, because you deserve to be remembered. I didn't touch it. I just looked. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I already knew. They can keep their dinners, their name, their carefully rehearsed version of events, but they can't keep the story whole without me. The first light of the year spilled across the floorboards like forgiveness. I hadn't drawn the blinds last night, and now the sun crept in through the thin cotton curtains like it had been waiting its turn. I sat quietly on the couch, a chipped mug warming my palms. Mint tea again, my version, not Mom's. A little stronger, a little messier. The room was clean, not because I expected guests, but because the act of tidying had become a ritual. Order in a world I no longer tried to fix. I reached for my phone, not out of habit, not anymore. No new calls, no messages. I had deleted most of my contacts weeks ago. Family names I'd once dialed in sequence. Gone. I didn't need reminders. I glanced at the table, the one with the faint ring stain. That's where Julia's folder used to sit, just beneath the coffee spill I never quite got out. For months, it had felt like evidence of betrayal, of silence, of being too much and never enough. Now it was just a coffee table. I opened the drawer slowly, knowing exactly what waited inside. A fat envelope with copies of the payroll records. Julia's name bold on every forged line. Receipts, scanned emails, the works. I'd kept them not for revenge, but out of reflex, like a child clinging to proof they hadn't imagined the monster under the bed. I lifted the envelope, held its weight in my hands. Then I began to tear, first in half, then again, and again. Shredded paper fell like confetti onto my lap, a celebration without a party. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. It was over. Not because they said so, because I did. Somewhere in the middle of it all, I paused and looked around. The walls hadn't changed. The sofa still sagged where I always sat. The bookshelf still leaned slightly left, as if tired of holding stories. And yet, everything felt lighter, like a balloon finally let go. I walked to the hook by the door. Empty now. That's where Julia's scarf used to hang, soft wool with tiny tassels she once called dorky. I remember the night she gave it to me. Thanksgiving, I think. Or maybe the one before. My memory no longer bothers to index their dates. On a shelf, a thin photo album slumped between cookbooks. I pulled it down, not knowing why. Flipping through pages, fingers slowed over one photo. Julia and me, both in red Santa hats, squinting into the sun. 2005. I don't remember who took the picture, but I remembered laughing, really laughing. That version of us? It belonged to a time that wasn't coming back. Back when Dad still carried a camera in his coat pocket. When Mom used to hum while slicing apples. When Julia and I argued over tree ornaments instead of inheritance. I closed the album gently and placed it in the donation box with the scarf. That laughter didn't belong to this version of me. Not anymore. Outside, the wind chased last night's snow into soft drifts. I slipped on my coat, grabbed the small box I'd filled last night. A man with calloused hands and a gentle smile took it. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes. Keep it moving." Back home, the quiet welcomed me like an old friend. I passed the framed mirror by the door, once Julia's, now mine. For a moment, I caught my own eyes and saw someone I didn't need to explain anymore. I poured another cup of tea, wiped down the counter. The rag swept over the same spot where Mom's Christmas arrangement used to sit. It had left a tiny dent in the wood. I used to think it was damaged. Now I saw it as proof. I had been here. I had left a mark. I opened the window. Cold air slipped in, sharp but clean. Somewhere below, the hum of life moved on. Cars, dogs, footsteps I didn't need to follow. I looked at the door. No one was knocking. I didn't leave with a fight. I left with silence. And silence, I've learned, is the loudest truth. Sometimes I still catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting someone to knock. But there's a quiet peace in knowing no one will, and realizing I no longer need them to. I've come to believe that the hardest kind of love is letting go of the version of family we were taught to chase and choosing the truth instead. The past doesn't need my permission to exist, but I can choose how loudly it echoes in my present. If this story resonated with you, I'd really love to hear your reflections in the comments. And if you'd like to walk with me through more quiet reckonings like this, consider subscribing. Thank you for listening. Until next time.